You guys have sent us videos by Dr. Michael Greger many times in the past and asked us to comment or react. And this week again, we got numerous requests to comment on a new video of his that just came out. So let's take a look. If you're a regular viewer, you're probably familiar with the rules of the house. We don't go after the individual. We don't attack character or intelligence or physical appearance, nothing like that. We only examine the scientific arguments and do they match the evidence. The rest are distractions. All right, let's do it.
It's a debate that always sparks nice kind of attitudes about what we should all be doing, because this section is a two-chart challenge. This is where I'm going to get two experts and they're going to answer the big issues of our time, not from an emotional point of view, but purely from a factual point of view. And the question today is, what diet is actually healthier? Is it a vegetarian or a meat-based diet? And so I am delighted to say that I'm joined now by Ivor Cummings, a metabolic researcher.
Okay, so it's on TV and Michael Greger is in a debate, but this is only it's only 7 minutes long, the video, so it's a pretty quick debate. And I imagine Greger is going to argue the vegetarian diet.
Why is a meat-based diet healthier for the human body?
Right, thanks a lot, Bev. Well, I'll just say something first. My views reflect the views of my enormous network of professors, doctors in metabolic and nutrition science. So it's not just me. So the reality is that a meat-based diet is nutrient dense. And the proteins in meats and animal foods are way more bioavailable, right, to humans. A part of it is our evolution came from eating meat. So to get a decent protein, and 40% of Americans in a recent study are not reaching the target. That target's been raised, so it's worse than that. And the bioavailability of proteins...
Look at Greger shaking his head no. 40% of Americans aren't getting enough protein. That sounds really high. So the largest analysis I've seen on this topic, I just pulled it up, and it estimates in total about 9% of Americans don't reach the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance for protein. And this is largely concentrated in specific ages. So the 40%, he might be referring to some studies out of Ohio State that found numbers around that range, but a critical thing to mention is they looked only at an older population. Everyone in that study was over 51. They didn't even look at anyone under 50. And they found up to 46% of the oldest adults didn't meet protein recommendations. So that makes more sense, because we know this is more of an issue with an older population with reduced appetite and other health problems. In fact, that oldest group that wasn't getting enough protein was getting less than 1,400 calories a day total. So this is largely a not eating enough food problem. And they were also short on a bunch of other nutrients. Most of those people didn't meet recommendations for vitamin B6, vitamin C, choline, vitamin A, vitamin D, and 94% didn't reach recommendations for fiber. So it's not that they're all vegetarian and just eating salads all day. These are older people who eat very small amounts of food, probably low quality foods, who have appetite issues and likely poor health all around. And even for that population, this 40% not getting enough protein might not be accurate. If we look at that larger analysis from earlier that found 9% overall for all Americans, when they split people by age and looked only at people over 50, it was 10 to 20% of people that didn't meet the RDA. And even for the very oldest, over 80 years old, it was 17%. Now, for technical reasons, I suspect this estimate is closer to the truth. The Ohio studies are based on only 1 day of eating, one 24-hour recall. And this larger analysis took a couple of days and averaged them together, so it might reduce measurement error. But leaving aside all the technicalities, let's say the real number is somewhere in between, right? And we could even argue for a protein target a little higher than the RDA for an older population. We covered all this before in some detail. Bottom line is, in an older population with appetite issues, I think that is a context where an argument can be made for the benefit of increasing animal products relative to what some of those people are eating. I think that's defensible on the evidence, and I think it could help some of those people in that situation. The other context is malnourished populations in third world countries, for example. Adding some animal products to their baseline diet could help there as well. But it matters how we present things, right? When we just say, 40% of Americans aren't getting enough protein. It sounds like it applies to everybody equally. Everybody gets a little bit anxious and says, maybe I should be cramming a little bit extra. But that doesn't reflect reality at all. This is an issue of pretty specific demographics. The average American is already getting much more protein than the RDA, about 50% more when we look at young adults up to middle age.
And the bioavailability of proteins is around a half to a third often of animal foods. So we have a huge problem.
Yeah, this is largely based on studies in mice and pigs fed raw grains and raw beans in isolation. That's where these big numbers come from. When you look at tests in humans, eating normal meals with mixed foods and cooked, some not, and actually much more relevant tests like actual function or even muscle growth, which is a much higher bar than an intestinal assay. The difference between plant protein and animal protein is much smaller and completely goes away if people are getting enough protein. We looked at all of this in detail in the video with Dr. Stuart Phillips, and this has now been shown over and over again. There are many trials showing equal muscle growth on plant or animal protein if people eat enough total protein and enough leucine. Now, if someone eats small amounts of food or low amounts of protein or has some issue, then yeah, these differences could start mattering more.
Developing world, a massive problem. Almost none of them are getting their required protein and vitamins. And animal foods are the solution, even acknowledged by the WHO, though not pushed very hard. It's acknowledged that meat, fish, and eggs and nutrient-dense foods are required for the anemia and the protein deficiencies across the whole planet. So,
right, this is the other valid context, malnourished populations in Africa, etc. Yeah, some of these people get 80% of their calories from one grain or one tuber. They're deficient in all kinds of nutrients. The children are stunted often. Yeah, if they have the chance to add some dairy or some meat on top of their baseline diet, of course, that's a huge upgrade nutritionally. But obviously, this is a financial, an economic issue. It's not a question of choice. They're not sitting there wondering, should I be vegetarian or omnivore? They're worried about getting enough calories to survive. So it's just important to be clear what we're talking about. This has nothing to do with your average middle-class Westerner shopping at Ralph's, choosing between 1,000 different foods, unlimited calories, 50 different sources of protein, completely unrelated. Another thing that makes these very extreme positions a little odd is that a lot of these decisions are case by case. Somebody who has anemia might choose to add a little bit more meat to their diet. That's an option. Somebody who has high cholesterol might choose to cut back on red meat, for example, and eat more fish or more beans. So a lot of this is contextual. The other thing is these two contexts, the older population and the malnourished populations, animal products can help there, but it doesn't have to be meat, of course. It can be meat, it could be fish, it could be dairy, it could be some eggs. In fact, I think you just listed those foods, so that's good. But you could even potentially design a vegetarian diet that solves a lot of those issues with some milk and some yogurt and some eggs. So these points are not arguing for meat specifically. They apply to omnivore diets and even vegetarian diets. So that's not knocking him necessarily. It's just a debate, put these very tight labels on him. Vegetarian versus meat-based. Most people are on neither of these extremes. And most diets don't apply to either category, including many diets that have a lot of evidence for their health effects. Mediterranean diets, pescatarian, Nordic diet, they're not vegetarian and they're not meat-based either. So I get why the show does it like this. It's maybe more attention grabbing, these extremes, but not sure how helpful this is for the public.
So a vegetarian diet is doable, and I have many vegetarian friends, and Joel Kahn, a vegan cardiologist who's quite famous, good pal. However, he acknowledges you need to get your supplements and you need to be very careful with a diet that's missing animal foods. And he acknowledges that.
Yeah, if you remove animal foods, you need a good source of B12. And actually, there's a few other nutrients that it's good to keep in mind as well. And on a vegetarian diet, it might not be a bad idea to supplement B12 because eggs and dairy are not great sources. Every diet has caveats. Omnivore diets have caveats. But yeah, it's good to reinforce this Because sometimes people go on vegan diets and don't necessarily do all the homework and kind of do it a little randomly and can get into trouble. So yeah, good to reinforce this. Okay.
Dr. Michael Greger. Ivor Cummins has friends who are vegetarians. He even has some friends who are vegan, but they're not as healthy as him, are they?
Unfortunately, look, the number one killer of British men and women is heart disease. There's only one diet ever proven to reverse the progression of heart disease. That's a plant-based vegetarian diet. If that's all a plant-based diet could do, reverse the number one killer of men and women, shouldn't that be the default diet until proven otherwise?
Yeah, this is a common talking point. I hear this often. I find this really unconvincing on the evidence. We actually have a whole video going over this in detail, all the data. So usually this is based on two studies. There's a case series by Dr. Esselstyn, and then there's the Ornish trial. Long story short, the Esselstyn report is an observational description of his patients' outcomes, which is totally fine, but there's no randomization and there's no adjustment for confounders. So it's what we'd call hypothesis generating. Interesting observations. Let's test in a more robust setting, right? We would never look at the Esselstyn report and go, oh, so diet causes XYZ, okay? Now, the Ornish trial is a more robust setting. It's a randomized clinical trial, and it's an interesting trial. The results suggested a reduction in plaque size. Emphasis on suggest, okay? Interesting finding, really interesting. The problem are the exaggerations. Listen to how Michael Greger phrased that.
There's only one diet ever proven to reverse the progression of heart disease. That's a plant-based vegetarian diet.
The Ornish trial had 4 components: the diet, stopping smoking, stress management with meditation, etc., and exercise. It was a whole program. So people were doing these 4 things at the same time. So you can't say it was definitely the diet that did it, any more than I can say it was definitely the meditation that reversed heart disease. And meditation is the only thing ever proven to revert. Nobody would take that seriously. This isn't even getting into the technicalities of the imaging they used, but just the experimental design doesn't justify Greger's claims the way he phrases them. And then saying it's the only diet. There's a recent trial suggesting reduction of plaque size with a Mediterranean diet. It's called Cardioprev. Just to give you an idea, the Ornish trial, the publication everyone cites, lasted 1 year. Then they had a follow-up at 5 years, so let's say 5 years total. And it had 48 participants. Cardioprev was a 7-year trial with almost 1,000 people, and they only changed diet, not the entire lifestyle. Now, one difference is Ornish looked at the coronaries and Cardioprev looked at the carotid arteries. So we could say one is heart disease per se, the other is cardiovascular disease. Okay. Otherwise, the Cardioprev trial is a much larger trial. It's longer than Ornish, and they only changed diet. I don't think we can say that the Mediterranean diet reverses heart disease. This claim of reversal is complicated. There's specific criteria to say that the plaque is meaningfully reduced. But it's just the way the claim Michael Greger makes and the way he phrases it is such a wild overstatement on multiple levels. If he came out and said a diet rich in fruits and vegetables and unprocessed plants is a great tool to help prevent and manage cardiovascular disease, great. There's endless data to back that up. But it's that stretching, right? It's not just prevention. It reverses it, and we definitely know it. And by the way, it has to be the vegetarian diet. It's not just any diet rich in fruits and vegetables. It's the only one. So it's this temptation to exaggerate, to make it really specific and really unique and special. I don't think it's necessary to do this at all, and I think it looks really bad.
And the fact that can also be so effective in preventing, arresting, or reversing other leading killers like type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure would seem to make the case for plant-based eating simply overwhelming.
Yeah, lots of diets reverse diabetes or improve or normalize glucose. The main lever seems to be weight loss. So that's why you hear the low-fat guru saying, my diet reverses diabetes, and the low-carb guy says, no, our diet reverses diabetes. And the plant people and the meat people, everybody says that. They're all elimination diets. They all get rid of junk foods. So people find it easier to lose weight, and glucose improves as a consequence in all of them. In fact, the most rigorous trials we have looking at diabetes reversal, so to speak, used low-calorie diets. They weren't particularly low-carb or low-fat or any of these trends. So this diabetes thing gets thrown around a lot, but it's not an argument for a vegetarian diet specifically. And by the way, the weight loss also improves blood pressure and a number of other markers. I'm not saying diets are all the same and just flip a coin. They're not. There's enormous data telling us which dietary patterns are health promoting and which are probably not. I'm just saying these arguments they're presenting are not very strong. They both have the same problem. One is arguing for the value of animal products in specific contexts, which is fine, but has very little to do with a meat-based diet. The other is arguing for benefits of fruits and vegetables, which is fine, but is not an argument for a vegetarian diet specifically. You can get hella plants on all kinds of dietary patterns that are not vegetarian. So the debate kind of boxed them into these artificially polarized extremes, and the arguments they're bringing up are pretty tangential to those labels.
Overwhelming. People aren't dying of deficiency diseases. When's the last time you heard of someone having protein deficiency, beriberi, pellagra, scurvy? No, people are dying of excess, of diseases of excess,
That's a valid point, that overt protein deficiency, kwashiorkor, is virtually non-existent in the West. It doesn't mean that people are at ideal levels necessarily. You could get enough, plenty of protein to avoid overt deficiency and not be at ideal range. That's possible. But it's absolutely true that the main threat to Westerners, by a landslide, are diseases of excess. Heart disease, obesity, diabetes, even cancer to some extent, are diseases related to eating too many calories and too much of the wrong foods.
Excess, saturated fat and cholesterol. The healthiest diet is one centered around whole plant foods.
So that's the strongest argument. I think this is what he should be arguing throughout, is the value of diets rich in whole plants, vegetarian or not.
Either you might look good, but inside your heart is not doing so well as a burgerholic.
Well, burgers are okay if there's no wheat kind of put into them, if they're just real meat. But
what's wrong with wheat? If you're not gluten sensitive or celiac, maybe he's got celiac disease. I mean, if the argument is that the bun is highly processed, refined carbohydrates, that's fine. But the problem is the wheat? That's completely random.
But I think Dr. Greger there is referring to the Ornish study, and I have many good cardiologist friends, including Dr. Arthur Agastson, who invented the Agastson score. And basically, those studies are dismissed. They're based on grainy kind of images. They're not really solid science at all. So
yeah, see, he knew this was coming up, this reversal thing, right? He even brings up the Ornish study. Greger didn't say anything about Ornish, I don't think. So he knew this probably was going to come up, and he was ready to just slap it down. So this is the problem. See, Greger cornered himself by making this super specific and kind of outrageous claim. If he had made a more conservative claim, he would have piles of evidence to back it up. Now, he's not explaining why the Ornish trial doesn't back up Greger's claim, the experimental design. He said, I have cardiologist friends who dismiss the study. That's not an argument. Who cares? They could be wrong. They're not sitting there to debate. You have to explain what the problem is. And I think this is the second time he's using an appeal to authority, right? The first thing he said when he came on was, I have this large network of colleagues who agree with me. Who cares? Why would you even say that? Science isn't decided by vote. I don't know if maybe he doesn't have a background in nutrition, so he feels the need to keep bringing up friends to back up. That's not just my opinion. You don't need to do that. That's not how this works. Now, he said something vague about grainy images. The Ornish trial used angiography, which measures the diameter of the lumen, basically the hole through the tube of the vessel. And it doesn't measure the plaque itself. So it's a tough assay for plaque measurement because of experimental artifacts. For example, artery dilation can mimic a reduction in plaque size. But the Ornish trial also suggested improvement in some symptoms like severity of chest pain, which is a really interesting result. It just doesn't justify the specific claim that Greger made. Because you could improve angina by dilating the artery, for example, and letting more blood through And the plaque could still be the exact same size. It could even be bigger in theory. So it's not that the study is not solid science. That's a pretty superficial take. The problem is claiming that it's definitely reversal and it was definitely the diet that did it. And by the way, it's the only diet. Those are all huge logical leaps. So Gregor kind of painted a big target on his chest with that claim, even though he doesn't seem to quite understand or be able to explain what's wrong with Gregor's argument. I think it's going to be hard for Gregor to come back from that just because his claim was such a big exaggeration.
And I just show something on the screen, if I could be at liberty to do so. And it's in reverse, unfortunately, but you'll see the blue line collapsing and the pink line rising up to the right over 40 years. Yeah. And essentially that's the reduction in red meat consumption over the last 40 years and the explosion of type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, which drives most heart disease. So to be honest, this isn't rocket science. We've lowered our nutrient density meats and we've exploded our chronic disease.
I think most viewers could see through that without me saying anything. I mean, try it. Pause the video, look at the graph he's showing, and explain what's wrong with this type of evidence and what he's implying. So he's showing two things that happened at the same time in this population. Red meat intake came down, risk of diabetes went up. A billion other things changed. These two random events could be completely unrelated. People are eating more calories overall. People are eating more junk food, right? This tells us red meat was not the cause of that rise in diabetes. That's fine, in case somebody thought it was. By the way, this association doesn't even prove that red meat doesn't raise risk of diabetes. Think about it. We have to be very careful with these logical leaps. You could have people eating less red meat and an even bigger increase in refined carbohydrates or junk food in general. So overall, people are eating more calories, risk of diabetes is higher. But these two food categories could both be diabetogenic, calorie for calorie, compared to something else. You see? So we have to be very cautious with these. Like he said, it's not rocket science. You just look at we have to be very careful with knee-jerk conclusions for our own protection. To many people at home watching this play out rapid in real time like this, they might think, oh, so the rise in diabetes is because people are eating less red meat, which is kind of what he's implying there, but that doesn't follow from that graph at all. We don't draw causal conclusions from this type of evidence. We run studies with control groups where confounders are adjusted for so that we can isolate a variable. This is very important. Look what he wrote on top. The best statistical test is the eyeball test. I mean, come on. This is straight pandering to a lay audience. Viewers probably will remember this image over pretty much anything they said because it's simple. One line goes down, one line goes up. It sticks. And then the one-liner on top. People sometimes like these things that you can see it with your own eyes. You just get it, right? This guy's talking sense, not a bunch of technical jargon. But truth is, this has no scientific substance. In a debate that's supposed to be about science, what he wrote on top there, I mean, it's embarrassing. Oftentimes, what's impactful for an audience and what's scientifically robust can be completely at odds. I don't know how we solve that.
The cardiac disease, the biggest killer. It's insulin resistance driven and whole foods.
I don't know where people get this idea. I get this question all the time in the comments. Is it all insulin resistance based? People with normal markers of insulin resistance, like HDL cholesterol and triglycerides, completely in the normal range, can still have cardiovascular disease. You can even worsen insulin resistance and lower cardiovascular risks at the same time. Some specific classes of statins do that. So from the evidence I've seen, I think insulin resistance probably is a factor, a contributing factor among several others. Cardiovascular disease is multifactorial. But this idea that it's the root cause, it's insulin resistance driven, like he said, the strongest evidence seems to point against that. This idea might be based on association of insulin resistance with risk in some observational studies, which we have to be very careful with because insulin resistance often co-occurs with other risk factors, poor diet, overweight, high ApoB, etc. So this conclusion would require a different type of analysis and different experimental tests. And so far, it doesn't seem to pan out. Anyway, I don't think this is a big issue because a healthy lifestyle improves all aspects of health at the same time, improves body weight, improves glucose metabolism, including insulin resistance, improves cholesterol, improves blood pressure, improves inflammation. So it's kind of a non-issue.
Based diet with plant foods can help counter this catastrophe.
Go on then, Michael. That's a very convincing chart that Ivor Cummings brought to the occasion. Do you have a chart?
Yeah, see, power of images, man. Now he can try to explain why that's weak evidence, but it's always going to be words against image. It's an uphill battle.
Do you have a chart that can beat that?
My chart was all the diseases that are lower rates in vegetarians. And so beyond the heart disease, there's low rates of cancer and dementia. And in fact, I ran out of space. There's also lower gout, on and on.
Okay, it's a list of diseases that are less common in vegetarians. It doesn't mean that going vegetarian is going to lower the risk of those diseases. We would need more information to make to conclude that. Also doesn't mean that other diets can't have the same effects or have the same lower prevalence of those diseases. In fact, we could probably make a similar list for Mediterranean diet. Not that the Mediterranean diet is magic, it's just there's so much research on it. In terms of communication, I don't know if this is a good idea. Obviously, they told them to bring a chart to show. It's called the 2-chart challenge. And one man showed an image and the other almost literally showed 1,000 words. So I think we all know which one the audience is going to remember. By the way, guys, I have no doubt this is incredibly difficult. You're answering these questions in real time, things coming at you, remembering studies in the moment, and you're under pressure, you're on TV. This is incredibly hard, I'm sure. So the idea here is not to tear down these guys. It's easy to talk until we're in the hot seat, right? So we're just dissecting the arguments for our own learning. So please don't take this as a personal attack on these guys.
On and on. Dr. Dean Ornish, the heart disease reversal study was published in the most prestigious medical journal in the world, The Lancet, out of Great Britain. I feel like I'm talking.
This is not an argument, right? It's basically appeal to authority. Again, it's a good journal. I could show you studies in phenomenal journals that were retracted because there was some flaw. So, yeah, this is not how we judge if a study is robust. Notice they're doing pretty much the same thing. One is arguing the Ornish study is great, the other is arguing it's trash, but neither one is talking about the actual substance of the study, what they actually reported. All these points are tangential. Who dismissed the study or not, which journal it's in, it's all kind of beating around the bush.
Out of Great Britain. I feel like I'm talking to a flat earther here, but it's even worse than that. I mean, if you want to go around talking about like lizard people or something, you can just get dismissed as a crank. But what you're spewing could actually hurt people, could kill people.
But
I think maybe he's getting frustrated with how this is going, but you can't do that. You can't insult the guy. I mean, calling him a flat earther in a debate that's supposed to be about science, it's basically the biggest insult you can dish out. You have to explain why what he's saying is wrong. And to be completely fair, Gregor hasn't really been making much better arguments. I'm sure this is not an easy job, but I think breaking down and insulting the guy like that probably makes you look bad in the eyes of the audience. I could be wrong. Even if you think it, you can't say it.
But Michael, your chart was rubbish. It wasn't even a chart. It was just a load of words written down on a piece of paper in a green felt tip pen. Ivor's going on the science, isn't he?
A lot.
Yeah, this is getting so heated. The host is loving it. She's like pitting them at each other, right? She's like, did you hear what he said? What are you going to do about that? Your graph was garbage. Yeah, she's ramping up the virality, I guess.
Lots of things have changed over the last few decades. That's what's called ecological evidence. It's the lowest rung of evidence. The fact that, overall population consumption has gone up or down versus disease rates. What we want are interventional studies, randomized, controlled studies where you can actually prove you can reverse the leading killers of Britons with.
Okay, yeah. He nailed that explanation, right? Scientifically, that was on the dot. Now, the audience is probably going to remember the image, not the explanation, but that's not his fault. He couldn't have explained that any better than he did. But this is my dilemma with some of the stuff I've seen from Michael Greger. He can tear a bad argument on the spot. So he understands types of evidence. He understands hierarchy of evidence. So why are some of his arguments so weak? I don't get that. The reversal of heart disease argument, suggesting that adding some fish to a diet is unhealthy, discouraging olive oil intake against a massive balance of evidence. You guys sent us a video a while back where he basically dog whistles that olive oil is unhealthy, is bad for cardiovascular health. That argument, in light of balance of evidence, is as bad as anything we've heard here today from either side. So he has moments of scientific acumen, interspersed with some terrible arguments on balance of evidence. It's almost like he can switch it on and off. I don't get that.
A healthy diet, and that is a diet centered around plant foods, reducing one's intake of meat, eggs, dairy, and junk.
Ivor Cummings, last word to you.
Okay, the Ornish diet is decades-old study based on a handful of people, and it's been ripped apart left, right, and centre. I won't even give it dignity, but I'll just show one more thing.
Okay, age of a study is not an argument. Some classical studies are amazing. Handful of people, yeah, it's a smaller sample. So we can say we'd like to see it replicated with a larger sample. That's good. We don't dismiss a study because it's a small sample. And then it's been ripped apart left, right, and center. Again, punting to what others have done. You have to explain why it doesn't support the claim made by Greger. Right? So he still hasn't done that.
But I'll just show one more thing. University of Washington, a full review, and basically red meat is not a health risk. So it was anti-science and junk science that said it was.
Yeah, this is a systematic review that came out a couple months ago. What he's showing on the right there, saying not a health risk, is actually a blog written by a journalist about the study. It's this blog. The actual study reported an association between unprocessed red meat consumption and colorectal cancer, breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, and ischemic heart disease. But they concluded the evidence was weak. Okay, what do they mean by weak? The effect sizes were very small, and there was a lot of variability between the different studies they looked at and compiled for their analysis. So that could mean a couple things. It could mean that the effect of red meat is very small. It could mean that there is no effect to red meat, and those associations are not real, they're spurious. Or it could mean that it depends what you are comparing the red meat to. This study he brought up didn't specify replacements. It didn't specify what the red meat is being compared to. In fact, they discussed this issue themselves. This is directly from the study. They found inconsistency in the evidence at low levels of red meat consumption, illustrating the importance of which foods serve as replacements for red meat. The harmful impact of red meat depends on the type of foods consumed in place of red meat. A wide range of healthy or unhealthy foods might be substituted for red meat and could increase heterogeneity, so variability. Here's an example. This study found that replacing some red meat with eggs was not associated with a significant reduction in risk of coronary heart disease, but replacing it with dairy or legumes, for example, was. The bottom line here is not that these foods are good and these foods are bad. It's that you get different answers depending what you compare something to. And if you lump everything together, you get a lot of variability. We also know from previous work that the most common alternative people go to are refined carbohydrates, junky foods. So when we don't specify a replacement, usually that's what we're comparing it to by default. This study explains this principle really clearly. In most populations, most energy intake comes from refined starches, sugar, potatoes, and fats that are highly saturated or partially hydrogenated. That's trans fats. So, analyses that fail to specify comparison foods are by default mainly comparing red meat with these suboptimal sources of energy. Therefore, lack of an association of red meat with disease simply implies that red meat is as unhealthy as these alternative foods. So, since the review he's bringing up didn't specify a replacement, we have to hypothesize that likely it will include, at least in part, refined carbohydrates and some of these suboptimal replacements. And yet they still found a benefit of moderating red meat, even against these potential comparisons. Now, finding an association like this doesn't prove that red meat causes disease. It's not that simple. Just like we saw with some of the other examples, right? We need to go through a number of checks and balances. We need to look at balance of evidence before we can infer that there's cause and effect. And there's lots of nuance on this topic. We actually have a whole video exactly on this question. But you see how different things can look when we understand a few of the moving parts. You could find a blog headline making a really categorical, confident statement about a study, and yet the study itself could mean almost the exact opposite, potentially. These are very emotional topics for a lot of people, so we have to be cautious how we come across, how we communicate. Telling someone, if you have any red meat in your diet, you're going to get cancer. That's not backed by the evidence. And neither is telling people, we know that there's no risk.
Red meat is not a health risk.
He doesn't know that. Nobody does. In fact, they interviewed a professor from the institute that carried out the study. Here's what he said. This is a direct quote. It's not an interpretation of a journalist. We're not saying that there's no risk associated with red meat consumption. What the study indicates is the evidence is very mixed, or the association is rather weak. That's an objective description of the findings. We can take that seriously on the scientific level. You see the difference? It's cautious, acknowledges uncertainty, presents the possibilities. This is how scientists normally sound. Now, it's not catchy, right? It doesn't stick. So we just have to be very careful with blogs and blog headlines, all right? We're basing life and death decisions, our life and death, on what a blogger or a journalist thought a study might mean. You don't want to do that.
So it was anti-science and junk science that said it was. The reality is now full review, and we've known this for 10 years. Red meat is nutrient dense, healthy. Eggs are a superfood. You should have a balanced omnivore diet with high nutrient density, and the science now is clear as day. The red meat kind of scam saying it's unhealthy was absurd.
Yeah, this is coming to an end, and he's going on a bit of an emotional rant, calling things scams and junk science. Emotional language, you expect to see that maybe on Facebook. In my opinion, not appropriate for a scientist on TV, addressing the public, trying to increase clarity. And he's going on this rant on the back of a study that he essentially misunderstood, right? Misquoting blog headlines. So we have to try to stay level-headed. And superfood is not a term with any scientific basis in nutrition. It's basically a marketing term. There's no such thing as a superfood.
We evolved via access to nutrient-dense meats. No paleoanthropologist worth their salt would question that. It's a reality.
Yeah, ancestor diets, we have a whole episode with a paleoanthropologist coming up. We're going to explore all of this, ancestor diets, evolutionary biology, implications for modern dietary choices. Excited about that, so stay tuned.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for kicking off the 2-chart challenge.
Yeah, so this is over. In general, a bit of a mess. Scientific level of the discussion, quite low, just to be completely honest with you guys. And here's the interesting or the odd part to me, is this is on TV. It's not an internet debate. They could have gotten anyone, hundreds of people with deep understanding of nutrition, with decades of experience of running trials in humans, of publishing research, that could come on, explain things, achieve some clarity for the public. But of course, that wouldn't be sexy, it wouldn't be viral, so a lot of times that's how this works. I don't know if viewers will take anything from this. They might be even more confused by the end. As for Dr. Michael Greger, that's what the viewers asked us to comment on. Some of his ideas are based on strong science. Many I find unconvincing, just not supported by balance of evidence. And this setup actually ends up being pretty revealing, more so than a typical Greger video where he's speaking alone, because here you see him juxtaposed with someone who's just as confused. And it just makes it clearer, right? If we forget for a second which diets they're defending, and we just focus on the structure of the arguments, the heuristics, it's not that different. A lot of the same misconceptions on both sides. Now, on the rare occasions where we do one of these reaction videos to a guru or influencer or whatever you want to call it, there's always somebody very angry in the comments that says, this person's changed my life and they're helping thousands of people. Why are you attacking this great man or woman? This isn't an attack on a person. It's an attempt to take an objective look at the claims. And that's how science works. Also, if Gregor's content helped you, great. Nobody's taking that away from you. In fact, if you follow Gregor, if you like him, you should want his claims scrutinized more, not less, for your own self-protection. And probably the biggest lesson from all of this, even when we believe that our overall message is health promoting and good for the animals and all these things, it is not a good idea to play fast and loose with the science to help sell it. Because this is what's going to happen. We're seeing it right here. Everybody else is going to play fast and loose with the science. Everybody else is going to misquote studies and misunderstand hierarchy of evidence and misunderstand everything to defend the foods they like. And you don't even have legitimacy after that to point fingers because you did the same thing, right? And the whole thing just becomes a joke, like a political show or marketing, and the public doesn't know what's true anymore and just starts dismissing everything. When someone realizes the reverse heart disease claim is a stretch, the tendency is to dismiss everything Gregor said. Maybe eating vegetables isn't based on sound science. All of these gurus are just making stuff up to justify what they like anyway. How do I know Gregor didn't make that one up? So the only solution is give people the imperfect facts, even when they don't match our personal preference, especially when they don't match our personal preference. And just let people make their own goddamn decisions. Is fishing an environmental catastrophe? Yes. Is it ethically horrific? Yes. I personally avoid fishing because of those reasons. But is it unhealthy to add some fish to a diet? No. The balance of evidence is overwhelming. So just say what we know and what we don't know. Don't exaggerate. Otherwise, we're all stuck in this mess. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next week. I'm out. Peace.